Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to my channel. In last week's video I talked about how I like to treat contrast paint like a tool in the toolbox. Sometimes it's the best option, and other times a different technique might be better. I want to paint some Dwarf Miners to a simple tabletop standard, and rather than use contrast paint, I think these models are perfect for an old school style base, shade, and layer method. We also have a set of recipe cards to go along with this video, and you can download them and print them out. Details about how to get them will be down in the description below. The first half of the video will be beginner friendly. We'll cover the basics and paint the model to a battle ready quality. In the second half, we'll spend a little more time and add some highlights. So let's grab our brushes and get started. After assembling the models, I undercoated them with white primer, and then I mounted them to corks for easier handling. I began by painting the skin using a few different mixes of Darkoath flesh. If you haven't seen my skin painting guide yet, you can check it out here. I'll also put a link down in the video description. With all the skin base coated, next I moved on to the metals. I painted all the steel areas with Iron Hand steel, and after the first layer dried, I painted a second for an even finish. I think it's okay to be a little sloppy with this layer, as long as it means getting an even finish on the steel. I'm not too worried if I get any paint on the other unpainted areas, since I'll be using opaque paints, but I do want to be careful around the skin and avoid making any mistakes there. Next I painted the remaining metal areas with Runelord brass, and again I painted a second layer after the first one dried. Dwarfs have a lot of metal on them, and generally I like to go with variations of steel and bronze. I have a few different color recipes I tend to fall back on, and depending on the other colors in the army, I'll choose whichever recipes would complement the color scheme. I painted the leather straps, gloves, shoes, and some of the pouches with Rhinox hide. After the first layer dries, you'll want to paint a second for an even finish. You could paint all these colors in any order you like. Each model is different, and depending on which colors overlap each other, you may find it easier to paint the colors in a different order on each model. You can also go back and forth between the colors. That's what's so great about opaque paints compared to contrast. They're very forgiving, and it's easy to fix mistakes. Then I painted the remaining pouches with gray number 2 from my custom grayscale, and you can learn how to mix your own set in this video here. If you don't feel like mixing anything, Eshin gray is a close match. The main color on these dwarfs will be red, and I painted the armor trim with Mephiston red. Take your time around the chainmail and shoulders, and try to be as neat as possible. Some of the models have a layer of fabric below the armor, and I painted that with Zandri dust. I also painted the roll on the top of this pack. The pack also had some rope, which I painted with Bonewhite. Next I shaded everything with a mix I affectionately call Armor Wash. This is a mix of equal parts Ratling Grime, Contrast Medium, and Lamian Medium. My old Armor Wash mix was equal parts Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil. This new mix has a very similar color, but it's slightly stronger and darker, which I prefer. If you don't feel like mixing anything, you could just use Nuln Oil instead. I painted the shade over everything on the models except for the skin. Keep an eye out for pooling, and use the brush to soak up excess paint as needed. I like to shade multiple areas at once whenever I can, because it can save a lot of time, especially over the course of a whole army. With the shade dry, now I can paint the remaining details. I base coated the candles with Bonewhite, and after the first layer dried, I painted a second for an even finish. Then I painted the flames with toxic yellow. On dwarfs, I tend to save the beards for last, especially if the model is holding a two-handed weapon. There are lots of opportunities for the other colors to spill on the hair, and by saving it for last, it prevents having to spend extra time doing unnecessary touch-ups. It would be too time-intensive to use contrast paint for the base coats, because I would have to paint the beards white first. Instead, I prefer base coating with an opaque paint, and then I'll use contrast paints as a shade. I find this process to be faster and easier as well. For a bright orange beard, I painted a base coat of Jokaero orange, and then I shaded it with Darkoath flesh. For a medium brown beard, I painted a base coat of Jokaero orange, and then I shaded it with Gore-Grunta fur. For a blonde beard, I base coated it with Balor brown, and then shaded with Skeleton Horde. For a tan beard, I base coated with Steel Legion Drab, and then shaded with a layer of Skeleton Horde. For a black beard, I began with a base coat of gray number 4 from my custom grayscale, and if you don't feel like mixing anything, Dawnstone is a close match. After the base coat dried, I shaded everything with black Templar. For medium gray hair, I base coated with gray number 4 or Dawnstone. Then I shaded it with a mix of equal parts gray number 2 and contrast medium. I painted the candle flames next with a layer of Iyanden yellow. I think it's easier to paint if I turn the model upside down. At this stage, you could base the models and call them finished. If you're painting a whole army, I would recommend getting all the models to this stage before adding more detail. That way you can get in some games and decide which models you want to put more effort in. Before I start highlighting the models, I'm going to add some black paint anywhere the model lacks definition. This is a technique often called blacklining. I diluted some black paint with water, and with a very sharp brush, I painted a narrow black line between any areas I think need more definition. I also painted some undiluted black paint on the undersides of the models. Next, I highlighted the skin and painted the eyes, following the guide I linked earlier in the video. I highlighted the edges of the red with Evil Sunz Scarlet. Since these models are for a large army, I'm not going to do any glazing or blending. Just one sharp edge highlight is enough for me. I'd like these models to stand out from a distance, and I'm less concerned with how they look up close. Next, I picked out the edges of the tan cloth with Zandri dust. Then I highlighted the rope with small lines of Bonewhite. Next, I highlighted all the dark brown leather with Blood Reaver flesh. Now is a great time for me to ask you to do those YouTube things that we all love so much. If you're liking the video so far, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. If you really like what I'm doing here and want to support the channel further, please consider Patreon or a YouTube channel membership. We have some perks including a Discord server, printer-friendly PDF files of our new recipe cards, and early access to videos. I highlighted the edges of the dark gray leather with gray number 4. Next, I highlighted the candles with Offwhite. I painted over most of the candle, leaving the darker base coat in the recesses. A couple of the models have headlamps, and I painted the lens with Toxic Yellow, followed by a shade of Iyanden Yellow. Let's highlight the beards next. I highlighted the bright orange beard with Fire Dragon. Then I highlighted the medium brown beard with rat skin flesh. I highlighted the blonde beard next with a mix of equal parts Balor brown and Bonewhite. I mixed some Administratum gray with Steel Legion Drab and highlighted the tan beard. Next I highlighted the black beard with gray number 4. I like to keep the lines as narrow as possible so the beard looks darker. If the highlights are too wide, it'll look gray instead of black. I highlighted the gray beard next with Administratum gray. Next, I lightly dry brushed the weapons with Iron Hand Steel, and highlighted the chainmail with a more controlled kind of dry brush. Be careful around the red trim and try to avoid making any mistakes. I painted the rivets and buttons next with a layer of black paint. Then I painted a narrow edge highlight on the top of the helmets with Stormhost silver, and I also painted the buttons, leaving a narrow black outline. Finally, I highlighted the edges of the bronze with a mix of about equal parts Runelord brass and Stormhost silver. If you don't feel like mixing anything, you can use Canoptic alloy instead. I'm focusing most of the highlights on the helmets, and not much else. Once the models are all ranked up in a movement tray, most of the highlights won't be visible anyway. I used an old brush to apply a generous layer of wood glue to the top of the base, and then I sprinkled on some coarse gravel and fine sand. After the glue dried, I painted the base with a layer of thinned Rhinox hide, followed by a dry brush of Mournfang brown, and then Balor brown. I painted the rocks with Zandri dust, and then highlighted with Bonewhite. I painted the edge of the base with Rhinox hide, and after that dried, I applied patches of static grass with superglue. I'd like to give a big shout out to our sponsors here on YouTube and now on Patreon as well. Thank you so much for your support. It really is a huge help. If you want to be like these amazing people and help support what I'm doing here, just click the join button down below or follow the Patreon link in the video description. Thank you. Painting an army effectively is all about striking the right balance between speed and quality. Treat techniques like different tools in a toolbox, and use the right technique at the right time. Decide which processes can be streamlined, simplified, or even eliminated. Not every model needs to be display quality, and the more time we can save across the whole army, the more time we have to dedicate on the important models, heroes, and centerpieces. What do you think? Do you put more effort into some models and less in others? Or do you paint everything equally? What are your favorite army painting tips? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy painting!